Have you ever wondered why so many world-changing ideas, things like the internet, the iPhone, seem to pop up in the United States? It's a question a lot of people ask. And the real answer? It goes way beyond just culture or money. It's actually a story that's rooted in thousands of years of conflict. Let's get into it. This line from a Reddit user really seems to capture that classic American spirit, right? It's this kind of defiant optimism, a feeling that you don't need to ask for permission to try something new. But is that spirit the real cause? Or is it just a symptom of something much, much deeper? So, that's the big question we're tackling today. Is it the people, the system, the history, or is it some kind of unique cocktail of all three? We're going to dive into this by looking at the popular wisdom, then some really deep historical forces, and finally, the big challenges that are just around the corner. All right, first up, let's talk about the usual suspects, the common explanations you hear all the time in conversations or online. These ideas have kind of formed a folk theory of what makes America so inventive. The popular answers are really a mix of culture and structure. On the cultural side, you always hear about a high tolerance for failure, a history built by risk-taking immigrants, and that classic rugged individualism. But, and this is crucial, all of that is propped up by some powerful structural advantages. Huge pools of venture capital, world-class universities, and massive government funding for research and development. And this idea of being okay with failure, it's literally baked right into the legal system. In the US, Chapter 11 bankruptcy isn't the end of the world. It's often seen as a learning experience, a chance to reshuffle the deck and try again. But in a lot of other places, failure can be a total dead end. It carries this heavy stigma that can stop people from even thinking about taking a big risk. Even the famous Singaporean leader Lee Kuan Yew weighed on this. He saw the spirit as a direct legacy of the American frontier, this mindset of just starting from scratch and building whatever you need. He argued that this DIY culture never really went away. But here's where we pivot. Are these cultural traits really the cause, or are they just the symptom of something way more fundamental? A culture that embraces risk doesn't just appear out of thin air. To find its source code, we have to go back in time, a lot further back than you might think. And this brings us to a really fascinating theory from a couple of economists, David Levine and Salvatore Modica. They make the case that the true origins of modern innovation were actually forged in the fires of millennia of conflict that literally shaped how societies evolved. The core idea is called conflict-driven evolution. So what does that mean? Well, to put it simply, when societies are constantly under threat from their rivals, the ones that survive are the ones that get really good at generating free resources. Basically, anything they produce beyond what's needed for bare survival. That surplus can then be used to win conflicts. That constant evolutionary pressure is the secret ingredient. Geography basically created two completely different paths of development. You had Europe, which was fragmented and always facing threats from every direction. This led to a balance of power, a state of non-stop competition. Then you have China, with its vast unified plain and fewer external threats. This led to hegemony, long, stable periods under a single ruler. One system was forced to innovate constantly just to survive. The other was built to endure and maintain stability. The theory uses this great analogy to make it super clear. Jewelry versus swords. So imagine a society has extra resources. It can spend that surplus on jewelry, which represents things for personal enjoyment, or on swords for defense. Now, left to our own devices, we'd all probably prefer the jewelry. But constant conflict forces a society to pour its resources into swords just to survive. Over centuries, evolution favors the society of sword makers. Okay. So how on earth does ancient European conflict lead to modern-day Silicon Valley? It might sound like a stretch, right? Well, this is where we bridge that gap and see how those ancient historical genes ended up building the American innovation engine we know today. So here's the chain of events. Europe's never-ending balance of power meant rulers were always competing for resources. And to do that, they had to create more inclusive institutions, things like property rights and predictable legal systems that unleashed the productive power of their people. This sparked a technological arms race that eventually got exported, forming the institutional DNA of the United States. And that DNA is what built the modern system. America's top-tier research universities are a direct result of this competitive model. They became magnets for the world's best talent, creating this powerful, self-reinforcing cycle of innovation that's often called the brain drain. And this system really does act like a global magnet for talent. I mean, just think about it. Google's co-founder? From Russia. PayPal's founders? They came from Ukraine, Germany, and South Africa. The guys who created YouTube? From Taiwan and Germany. The story of American innovation is so often an immigrant story. It's proof that this engine runs on global talent. But, and here's the twist, the very historical forces that created this engine are now changing. So let's look to the future, drawing on some analysis from the Atlantic Council to see what big challenges are waiting on the horizon. The future looks, well, a lot different. First, we've got disruptive tech, like AI and biotech, that are changing things faster than we can keep up. Then you have massive demographic shifts. By 2050, Africa will be the world's main source of labor. And of course, there's renewed geopolitical competition from major powers who don't necessarily share the same values or play by the same rules. And this quote from the report shows just how different the rules of the game might be. The Atlantic Council points out that certain ethical lines that guide research in the US might not exist for its competitors. This paints a picture of a future where the race for innovation could be run on fundamentally different tracks. So this leaves us with a huge critical question. The unique historical conditions that built America's innovation engine, all that conflict, that specific geography, those tech arms races, those conditions are fading into the past. As the world changes in these really fundamental ways, the real question isn't just if this engine can keep running, but what new forces will build the next one, and who's going to build it.